After pouring away the coffee and returning to the armory to take the thick stack of historical materials and explanatory transcripts from old Neil, Klein followed the wall of lights up the staircase to the Blackthorn Security Company. Tap, tap, tap. His footsteps echoed in the sealed and quiet basement. After Klein left the spiral staircase, he pushed open the door and identified his bearings before heading for the second office opposite of him. After familiarizing himself for 2 days, he had a general understanding of the layout of the Blackthorn Security Company. The entrance brought visitors to a huge reception hall with sofas and tables. Through the partition, there was an inner region. To the left of the corridor were 3 rooms. From the nearest to the furthest, they were Mrs. Oriana's account room, a rest room with a few sofa beds, and a staircase that led underground. On the right were 3 rooms. From the nearest to the furthest was Captain Dunn Smith's office, a civilian staff office with a typewriter, and the entertainment room for formal members of the network team. Klein had previously seen Leonard Mitchell playing cards with 2 other teammates in the entertainment room. He guessed that they were playing Fighting the Landlord. Of course, Emperor Ochel had already given it a new name, Fighting Evil. However, the way it was played was identical to what Klein knew. BREDT was entitled to a day of sleep after a night shift. Roseanne was at the reception desk. The carriage driver who was in charge of procuring necessities and collecting supplies, Césaire Francis, was out as usual. When Klein opened the door to the civilian staff office, the 3 desks inside were empty. Only the typewriter sat there silently. A Curson Company's Model 1346 typewriter, Klein, who had seen similar objects in his mentor's office in Welsh's Place, muttered. He felt that the complicated mechanisms inside were filled with the beauty of machinery. He walked to the desk with the typewriter. After preparing himself, he attempted to type something on air. In the beginning, he often converted the local language to Chinese, Pinyin, instinctively. Only after he was familiar with it did he digest the original Klein's corresponding memory fragment and no longer made mistakes. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythmic tapping on the typewriter sounded like a melody composed from the heavy marriage of metal and industry. Under this melody, Klein quickly typed the expenditure application. However, he was in no hurry to meet Dunn Smith. Instead, he focused his mind and read the materials provided by old Neil seriously. It was both revision and new material. When it was almost noon, he stretched his neck and put away the documents. He then read and consolidated what he had learned on mysticism in the morning. Only after all that did he take his application to the office next door and knocked on the door gently. Dunn was waiting for lunch to be delivered. When he saw Klein hand him the document, the corners of his mouth curved up. Did old Neil teach you this? Yes, Klein did not hesitate to betray old Neil. Dunn picked up his dark red fountain pen and signed it. I happened to be applying for funding for the months of July, August, and September from the church and the police department. I'll add yours in. When it's approved, get the money from Mrs. Oriana. You can draw the spirit pendulum in the afternoon. All right, Klein answered simply and vigorously. His tone and eyes were obviously filled with joy. Before bidding Dunn farewell, he asked casually, shouldn't the budget for July, August, and September be applied for by June? Why are you applying for July's budget only in July? Dunn fell silent for a few seconds before sipping his coffee. We encountered 3 cases in June. I was so busy that I forgot about it. As expected of Captain and his poor memory, Klein knew he had asked a question he should not have asked. He gave a chuckle before leaving immediately. With that, he began a simple but regular lifestyle. He would spend half an hour in the early morning cogitating. He would have 2 hours of mysticism lessons in the morning and an hour and a half of studying the historical documents. After lunch, he would take a short nap in the break room to regain his energy. Following that, he would draw bullets and head to the shooting club. After finishing his practice, he would stroll over to Welsh's Place, which was not too far. He would then change routes and return to Iron Cross Street. That way, he could save on the carriage fees. If he had time, he would practice his spirit vision and spirit dowsing. On the way, he would buy groceries. In a private chemistry laboratory equipped with apparatus and items. A tall, blonde Audrey was looking at the cup in her hand. There were countless bubbles, and it made the atmosphere serene. Finally, the liquid in the cup precipitated into a sticky silver substance. Ha ha, I'm indeed talented in mysticism. I succeeded in one try. I was worried of failure and prepared 2 sets of materials, the girl muttered to herself in delight. She put away the items she took from her family's vault or exchanged them with others. She took a deep breath and prepared to close her eyes to drink down the spectator potion. At that moment, barking sounded from outside the laboratory. Audrey frowned instantly. She hid the cup of silver liquid in a dark corner, turned around and headed to the door. Susie, who's here? Audrey turned the doorknob and asked the golden retriever sitting in front of the door. Susie wagged her tail in an obsequious manner. Her personal maid-servant, Annie, had appeared in the corridor nearby. Audrey walked out of the laboratory and closed the door. She looked at Annie and said, "Didn't I tell you? Do not disturb me when I'm running chemistry experiments." A vexed Annie answered, "But there's an invitation from the Duchess, Duchess Stella." Duke Megan's wife, Audrey took a few steps forward and asked Annie. "Yes, she has managed to hire the services of the palace's baker, Madame Vivi, and plans to invite you and Madame to afternoon tea." Annie recounted the invitation. Audrey tapped her cheeks discreetly and said, "Tell my mother that I have a headache. Perhaps I'm a little dehydrated because of the scorching sun. Please get her to convey my apologies to Madame Della." As she spoke, she acted frail. Miss, it's not only afternoon tea, but a literature salon, added Annie. But that won't treat my dizziness. I need rest, rejected Audrey firmly. Simultaneously, she muttered deep down. If they insist, I'll faint for all of you to see. The etiquette teacher said that I can do it most perfectly. I think I heard something. All right, Annie exhaled and said. Do you need me to help you back to your room? There's no need. I'll clean up the laboratory first. Audrey was yearning to return immediately to consume the potion. However, she suppressed her impatience. She only returned to the laboratory's entrance when she saw Annie leave. Suddenly, she discovered that the golden retriever, Susie, who was waiting outside, was gone. Furthermore, the door to the laboratory was half opened. I forgot that Susie can open doors with handles. What was that sound? Not good. Audrey heard crisp sounds coming from within. Suddenly, she came to a realization as she charged into the laboratory. All she could see was the cups shattered on the floor. Susie was licking the final drop of silver liquid. Audrey stood rooted at the entrance like a statue. Susie immediately sat down and looked at her owner innocently as she wagged her tail. In the seas beyond the Prince Harbour, there was an island perennially enveloped in storms. An ancient sailboat was docked at its harbour. A blond man dressed in a robe with lightning patterns was looking at Alger Wilson opposite to him. He asked, perplexed, Alger, you could have returned to the kingdom and become a captain of a mandated Punisher team or a reputable bishop. Why did you choose to voyage out into sea and become the captain of the Blue Avenger? Alger wore a stoic expression on his rough face. He replied solemnly, the sea belongs to the storm. This is the Lord's kingdom. I'm willing to abide by the Lord's will and monitor this area of his kingdom. All right. The blonde-haired man clenched his fist and struck his chest. May the storm be with you. May the storm be with you, Alger replied with the same standard salute. He stood on the deck with a few sailors and watched his companions leave the boat, walking into the distance. Saints, you do not understand because you do not know enough, Alger muttered silently. Meanwhile, Audrey finished her second concoction in a panic-stricken state. Seeing that the silver potion looked nothing different from before, she was nearly moved to tears. Gulp. She quickly drank down the spectator potion. Friday. A storm befell Tingen. The heavy rain pounded on the windows of every household. Inside the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein, Roseanne, and BREDT sat on the sofa in the reception hall and enjoyed lunch. As there was only a kettle for boiling water, there was no way to heat up leftovers. Klein could not eat rye bread every day or take the carriage home every day. If he did that, he would have to walk from Iron Cross Street to Welsh's Place in the afternoon and consider taking a carriage back. It was a waste of money. Therefore, he began joining Roseanne and his colleagues in eating the so-called office rations. The nearby Old Will's restaurant would punctually send a waiter at 10:30 every day. He would ask for their orders, and after determining the quantity, he would send it over at 12:30. The food was contained in what resembled meal boxes. At 3, he would return to take their orders for dinner and take back the utensils. The rations included meat, vegetables, and bread. Although the quantity was lacking, it was barely sufficient to fill a person. The cost of a meal ranged from 7 to 10 pence depending on the different premium levels. Klein would always thicken his skin and order the meal costing 7 pence. Typically, there was half a pound of wheat bread, a tiny piece of meat cooked in different ways, a ladle of thick soup with vegetables, and tiny bits of butter or margarine. We actually only have one talk here today, Roseanne said as she delivered a spoonful of thick soup into her mouth. I heard that a case with cultist elements is going on in Golden Indus. Therefore, the police department has requested for tuna talks, BREDT said as he put down his bread. Klein used the remaining wheat bread and dabbed it into the last bits of meat juice before stuffing it into his mouth. He did not say a word. Under his left sleeve, there was a silver chain with a topaz hanging. At that moment, knocks sounded outside the half-closed main door. Please come in. Roseanne was taken aback as she put down her spoon. She quickly used a handkerchief to wipe her mouth and stood up. The door was pushed open as a man in a half-top hat came in. The left shoulder of his black formal suit was drenched. The sides of his hair had grayed. He put away his umbrella and said to Klein and Company, is this the former small mercenary squad? You can say that, answered Roseanne like clockwork. The lanky man coughed and said, I have a mission request. A mission request. You probably came to the wrong place. This security company's signal board is really nothing but a signal board. Klein immediately held back his urge to lampoon when he heard the visitor. How he yearned for there to be a message board and a screen for him to share his thoughts. But he soon realized that he had once asked a similar question. The captain's answer was that they could take on jobs if they were free. The money earned could be used as funding for the team's petty cash account and bonuses for the participants. Roseanne's eyes darted around as she thought for a moment before saying, our security personnel are all out on missions. The fastest it will take for them to return is an hour. If your matter isn't urgent, you can consider our services. Among the 6 formal NetTalk members, Captain Dunsmith had been invited to the cathedral by the bishop for some unknown discussion. Leonard Mitchell was guarding Knisgate in his place. Corpse collector Brian Sleepless Royal Reading had already headed to the Golden Indus Borough to assist the police in the investigation of a robbery case with cultist inklings. Sleepless Kenny White was on leave, while midnight poet Seeker Tron had gone to Raphael Cemetery in the north suburb for a daily patrol. As for the remaining 2 Beyonders, old Neil was frail and too advanced in his years. He had not taken any missions in a long time. Klein was still a novice and was truly inadequate in various aspects. They are all out, with one hand holding his umbrella. The lanky man's expression turned gloomy as he took off his hat. He bowed and said, sorry for intruding. Goodbye. He turned around and walked out. He went down the stairs and left 36 Charlton Street amid the spattering rain and howling winds. What a bloody pity. Roseanne watched the man left and sighed regretfully. Although she would not have gotten any share of the commission, she definitely would have been able to partake in a sumptuous meal. There's nothing we can do about it. Knish Gate needs someone watching it all the time. Klein put down his cutlery in satisfaction. Even though he did not like the soup mixture of turnips and vegetables, he still drank it clean. Don't tell me you want BREDT to take the mission. Or yourself. Roseanne rolled her eyes and giggled. BREDT won't do, but you can. I'll miss this here. The moment she finished her sentence, she immediately realized what she had just said. She covered her mouth in shock because the door had not been fully closed. If someone walked past outside or heard anything about Beyonders, it would be considered a leak. Thankfully Captain isn't around. Roseanne looked out the door and secretly stuck her tongue out. Or I'll have to go for confession again. BREDT and Klein laughed out in unison as they exchanged looks before beginning to put away the cutlery. After everything was done, Klein, who did not bring his umbrella, decided to stay at Blackthorn Security Company due to the ongoing rain. He took out some newspapers and sat on the soft but bouncy sofa as he leisurely began his afternoon break. The airship route from Backland to Desai Bay is now in service. The complete anthology of the great detective Manseng is publishing soon. An advertisement for Lagula's weapons. A standard model revolver carrying 6 bullets costs £3 and 10 soldi. A double-barrel gun costs £2. Klein flipped through the Tingeon City Honest paper when a particular piece of news suddenly caught his attention. The suspect responsible for killing Mr. Welsh and Miss Nair has been caught. We believe it is a much-needed reprieve from the horror that has gripped North Borough, Golden Ingles Borough, and East Borough. Welsh's father, Mr. McGovern, who is a banker, has escorted his youngest son's corpse back to Constant City, where a grand burial will be held. After reading it a few times, Klein suddenly sighed. From the looks of it, Welsh's father had bought the police's explanations and did not hire a private investigator to investigate the matter. His grief from losing his youngest son can't be any greater than that of my parents who lost their only son. In a sudden mood, Klein sat there motionless for a long time. He neither found it odd that he was not invited to Welsh's and Nair's burials, nor did he feel depressed. Once everything calms down, I'll find a chance to offer a bouquet of flowers to their graves. Klein was about to take a nap in the break room when a knock came from the door of the reception hall again. Please come in. Roseanne, who was nodding off, suddenly jolted awake. The half-closed door was pushed open again. The lanky man from before walked in once again. Can I wait here? You're mercenaries. No security personnel should be back soon, right? He asked sincerely, trying his best to hide his anxious expression. Sure. Please have a seat. Roseanne pointed at the sofa nearby. Klein asked out of curiosity, where did you hear about our security company? Who introduced you here? He had made 2 trips despite a heavy afternoon storm while still willing to wait. Yes, the Nighthawks must have easily resolved missions that might seem very difficult to others. They must have accrued quite a reputation. The man left his umbrella outside the door, and as he walked to the sofa, he replied with a rueful smile, I have travelled the nearby streets and paid a visit to all the mercenaries. Ah, security companies and private investigators. You are my only hope. The others do not have the manpower to take additional missions, to be frank. If not for the waiter that delivers meals, I really did not imagine that there was another security company here. It's completely different from what I imagined. Klein was stunned. Roseanne interjected with a question. They are very busy? Are there that many missions? The man sat down and sighed. You are a mercenary team, no a security company. I believe you must have heard of the armed burglary murder at Howes Street. Howes Street armed burglary murder, all right. Unfortunately, I'm one of the people involved. Klein nodded with a slightly heavy heart. Yes, due to the presence of a ferocious and cruel criminal, the rich men living in the neighbouring streets, and even across all of Tingeon City, are terrified. Apart from increasing the numbers of their security detail, they have also hired many more security personnel and private detectives. This resulted in a shortage of supply in your line of work, the tall and skinny man explained clearly. A standard chain reaction. Klein and Roseanne exchanged looks and saw the self-deprecating smile from each other's faces. The security industry had entered a golden age. Yet, Blackthorn Security Company was not affected in any way. It was apparent how dismally the company was run. Of course, to a certain extent, it also proved the success of the Nighthawks in hiding themselves. After waiting for another 20+ minutes, Klein prepared to leave since the rain was coming to a stop. He planned on practicing at the shooting club. At that moment, the black-haired and green-eyed Leonard Mitchell walked out of the partition. He looked curiously at the sofa. This is a client. Is Captain back? Roseanne asked delightfully. Back. The lanky man was taken aback when he heard that. He had been sitting there, staring at the door. How did he not discover someone's return? Roseanne's expression immediately froze as she chuckled. As a security company, we don't only use the front door. Figures. The lanky man nodded in enlightenment. He was also not surprised by the term captain. Security companies were mercenary teams or small-scale mercenary guilds. It was normal for captain to be used. Leonard did not tuck in his white shirt. His black vest was also casually draped on. He took a glance at the lanky man when he suddenly snapped his fingers and said, I'm a member of the security personnel at Blackthorn. How might I address you? How may I help you? Perhaps it was because he had long heard about the unrestrained characters of mercenaries that he did not feel the anger of being humiliated. Instead, he let out a breath of relief. He watched Leonard sit down and organized his words. My name is Clee, a butler of Mr. Fitzroy, a tobacco merchant. His only son, little Elliot, was kidnapped this morning. We have already informed the police and the matter has been given high priority. However, Mr. Fitzroy remains uneasy. He wishes to go through the channels which mercenaries, security personnel have, as well as your understanding of Tingen, to investigate the case from a different angle and ensure that little Elliot is rescued safely. If you are able to find where the kidnappers are hiding, Mr. Fitzroy will be willing to pay you £100. If you have the means to successfully save young Master Elliot, he is willing to pay double. £200. Leonard Mitchell smiled leisurely. Mr. Fitzroy seems to only wish for us to find the kidnappers' hideout. If not, he will not think that his only son is worth £100. A tobacco merchant who has close ties with the southern plantations will not just offer £200. No, Mr. Fitzroy is only an ordinary merchant. He's not considered wealthy. Besides, he believes the police will be more professional when it comes to rescuing his son, Clee answered frankly. All right, no problem. Leonard snapped his fingers again. His green eyes turned their gaze on Roseanne. My beautiful lady, please write up a contract. Don't always act like a poet. In fact, all you do is recite the works of others. Having forgotten the presence of the client, Roseanne quipped. She was used to exchanging snipes with Leonard. Of course, the Blackthorn Security Company did not really care about its clients. It was great to have them, but it was also fine not having them. Roseanne left the reception counter and entered the staff office. Soon, there were sounds of typing coming out from the office. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched a little. He found them too unprofessional. There was no standard template for a contract. This sure is tragic, and more saddening is the fact that I'm working at such an unprofessional company. The moment these thoughts arose in him, Roseanne completed a simple contract that had only a few clauses. Then, Clee and Leonard Mitchell signed it. After Clee stamped it, she took the contract and returned to the accounting room and got Mrs. Oriana to stamp it with the Blackthorn Security Company logo, something that was actually useless. Dunn typically handed it to Oriana for safekeeping. On Sunday, it would be passed to Roseanne and Company. I'll wait for your good news. After receiving one copy of the contract, Clee stood up and bowed with his hat off. Leonard did not respond. He seemed to be in deep thought. He suddenly turned his head toward Klein and revealed a smile. I need your help. Klein was taken aback. I mean, you and I can finish this mission together. The corners of Leonard's mouth curved up slightly as he explained, I'm good at combat, shooting, climbing, sensing, enchanting, and taking on some support roles. But that does not include looking for people. You don't expect old Neil to go out in such weather, right? When he said sensing, his voice was lowered to a mumble that Klein could barely hear. All right. Klein did have the urge to attempt his new abilities, while also feeling a little wary toward Leonard Mitchell. Phew. Let's hope it will be completed successfully. I wonder how useful my seer abilities will be, he wondered with some anticipation. While looking at Klein, Leonard smiled and nodded. Then, do you need anything from them? He had cooperated with Old Neil and Company numerous times, so he naturally knew that divination required a medium, especially when the person being divined was not present. Klein thought for a moment before saying to Clee, I need some of Elliot's recent clothes which have not been washed or starched. It would be better if you have any accessories he used to wear on him. He tried to choose ordinary mediums, not something that would normally invite questions. But even so, Clee wore a look of puzzlement. Why, after his question, he added, I have a picture of young Master Elliot on me. Why? Because we're divining his location. Klein was momentarily at a loss for an answer. If he answered truthfully, ignoring the fact that it violated the confidentiality clause, Clee would likely storm out immediately and rip apart the contract while cursing, this bunch of cheats. If that works, why don't I find the most famous spirit medium in our county? By the side, Leonard Mitchell chuckled and said, Mr. Clee, my partner, colleague rears a unique pet. Its sense of smell is sharper than a hound's. That's why we need clothes that little Elliot wore and items he used to wear on him to aid us in finding him. As you know, clues typically bring you to a general region. As for the picture, we would need it too. Both of us need to know what little Elliot looks like. Clee accepted the reason by nodding slowly. Will you be waiting here, or will you be going with me to Mr. Fitzroy's residence in the city? Let's go together. It saves time, replied Klein simply. Not only was he eager to try out his abilities as a beyonder, but he also wanted to save the child. All right, the carriage is downstairs. As Clee spoke, he took out a black and white photograph and handed it to Leonard. It was a picture of Elliot Fitzroy alone. He was about 10 years old with rather long hair that nearly covered his eyes. There were obvious freckles on his face and he did not seem to stand out. Leonard glanced at it and handed it to Klein. Klein took a careful look and placed the photograph into his pocket. Then, he took his cane and put on his hat. He followed the two out of Blackthorn Security Company and boarded the carriage downstairs. The carriage's interior was rather spacious. It was lined with thick carpet and a tiny table to rest items on. As Clee was around, Klein and Leonard did not say a word. They quietly took in the experience of traversing the pooling roads in a carriage. The carriage driver is quite good. Leonard broke the silence after some time with praise and a smile. Yeah, Klein answered perfunctorily. Clee forced a smile and said, your compliments are his honor. We will be there soon. As they were afraid of alerting the kidnappers, the carriage did not stop at the Vicroys' residence. Instead, it stopped at the side of a nearby street. Clee held an umbrella and returned along. After waiting for some time, Leonard talked to Klein again. My surmise the last time was not without a goal. I was just trying to tell you that the notebook will definitely appear again. Perhaps it might be soon. That really isn't a happy surmise. Klein used his chin to gesture towards the carriage driver outside, indicating that he did not wish to discuss sensitive topics with outsiders around. Leonard whistled and turned his head to look out the window. He saw raindrops streak across the glass, leaving behind blurry marks. It made the world outside a complete blur. After a while, Clee returned with a bag of items. Since he walked in a hurry, the edge of his trousers were soiled and his shirt front was slightly wet. These are the clothes young Master Elliot wore yesterday. This is the storm amulet he used to wear. Klein took it and glanced at it. He discovered it to be a miniature gentleman's formal suit, a small shirt, vest, bow tie, etc. And the storm amulet was made of bronze. It was carved with symbols representing gales and sea waves, but they did not trigger Klein's perception. I'll recount in detail the incidents leading up to young Master Elliot's kidnapping. Hopefully, it will let you find him easier. Clee sat down and described the nightmare that happened in the morning, hoping that the helpers he went through great trouble to hire would be of help. Klein and Leonard held no interest in the specifics. All they cared about was the number of kidnappers, if anything unusual had happened, or if they had any weapons. 3. Normal, armed with firearms. After obtaining the desired information, they bade Clee farewell and hired a two-wheeled light carriage. Unlike public carriages, private hire carriages were either four-wheeled or two-wheeled. They were charged either by time or distance. The latter was at 4 pence a kilometre in the city and 8 pence a kilometre outside. The former cost 2 soldi per hour or part thereof. After the first hour, there were additional charges of 6 pence every 15 minutes. In inclement weather, or if the customer needed to go faster, the fare could even be higher. Klein had heard from Azite that in the capital, Backland, these carriage drivers were famous for quoting outrageous prices. To him, taking a private carriage was quite a luxury. However, he did not need to worry about this at the moment since Leonard had tossed 2 1-soldi notes to the carriage driver. Charge it by the time. After Leonard gave his instructions, he closed the carriage's door. Where are you going? The carriage driver was delighted and puzzled as he held the 2 notes. Wait a moment. Leonard cast his gaze at Klein. Klein nodded slightly and took out Elliot's clothes. He spread it out on the carriage's floor and then wound the storm amulet around his cane's handle. He held the silver inlaid black cane and hung it straight over Elliot's clothes. He gathered the sphere of light in his head as his mind rapidly turned still. His brown eyes quickly turned deeper in color as he entered a half-cogitation state. He felt to his body's spirit turning light. He vaguely saw the world of spirits everywhere. He silently said, Elliot's location. After repeating it 7 times, he released his grip of the black cane, but the cane did not fall to the ground. It remained standing in front of him even though the carriage was shaking. Minute but invisible stirrings happened around Klein, and he felt as if pairs of eyes were looking at him. Over the past few days, Klein had felt this sensation occasionally when he was in a state of cogitation or spirit vision. With a little fear, he looked at the cane with his deep black eyes. He recited once again in his heart, Elliot's location. Elliot's location. After he finished saying that, the cane fell and pointed straight ahead. Straight. Klein held the cane and said in a deep voice. His voice sounded a little ethereal as though it could penetrate the unknown world. This was one of the divination abilities he had grasped. It was called dowsing rod seeking. The tool of choice had to be wooden, metallic, or a mixture of both. In ordinary circumstances, he would require 2 real dowsing rods. Dowsing rods were shaped like 2 straight metal wires tapered to an edge. He would hold on to the shorter side and turn it to ascertain the correct direction. But as a seer, Klein realized that through practice, he could search for people directly using this method. He could also use his cane as a replacement for dowsing rods. The direction in which the cane fell was the direction of the item he was seeking. As for the Antigonus family's notebook, Klein could not remember it at all. Without the slightest impression, there was no way for him to find it. Go straight, Leonard instructed the carriage driver loudly. We will tell you when there's a need to turn. The carriage driver did not understand why that was necessary, but the notes in his pocket and the willingness of his passengers to hand over the money kept him quiet. He chose to follow the strange instructions. The carriage proceeded slowly, passing through one street after another. Midway, Klein used dowsing rod seeking to correct their direction. After the carriage circled a building once, he finally determined that Elliot was inside. It had only been 30 minutes since they bade Clee farewell. After sending off the cane, Klein did not continue using Elliot's clothes. Instead, he placed the cane, entwined with the storm amulet, directly onto the ground. His eyes turned dark once again as the raindrops around him suddenly spun in place. The cane fell to the front with a slant. Klein pointed at the staircase and said, There. At times, I really envy old Neil. Similarly, I envy you now. Upon seeing this scene, Leonard smiled with a sigh. Klein shot him a glance and replied with a calm tone, This is nothing difficult. If you are willing to learn, you would definitely be able to master it. Your perceptivity should be very high, right? Leonard nodded and chuckled. That's not something good. He quickened his pace and walked into the building amid the ending rain. Klein was afraid of drenching his formal suit, so he jogged in tow. The building only had 3 stories. It was similar to a unit block from Earth. The entrance to each floor was situated along the flight of stairs. There were only 2 units on per floor. Klein used dowsing rod seeking on both the first and second floors, but the cane remained still while pointing upward. The two of them quieted their footsteps and arrived at the 3rd floor. Klein once again placed the black cane on the floor. Whoosh! A breeze blew across the stairs as his pupils changed colors. The darkness seemed like it could suck the souls of people. Whoosh! 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 Sobs seemed to sound out around them. Klein relaxed his palm as the cane with the entwined storm amulet magically stood erect. He silently read Elliot's location again. He watched his black cane drop silently as it pointed to the right room. They should be in there. While Klein picked up his cane, he tapped his blabella twice. Various colors saturated as he looked at the right room. He saw all sorts of auras inside. 1, 2, 3, 4 kidnappers and 1 hostage. The numbers match. One of their auras is short. It's likely Elliot mystically said that they have 2 hunting rifles and a revolver, Klein whispered. Leonard chuckled. Let me recite a poem for them. Why be a kidnapper? Why can't you happily be a civilized person? He put down the bag with Elliot's clothes and took 2 steps forward. His expression suddenly turned serene and melancholic. His magnetic and deep voice gradually sounded. Oh, the threat and horror, the hope of crimson cries. One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies. Leonard's singing sounded like a lullaby as it lightly resounded through the doors and into the winding wooden stairwell. Klein's mind immediately turned torpid. He felt like he saw a silent moonlight and serene rippling lake. His eyelids rapidly turned heavy as if he were about to fall asleep standing. Amid these indistinct sensations, he also felt a strange, formless, and indifferent focus on his back. It felt like he was wandering the spirit world himself. A baffling sense of déjà vu suffused as Klein suddenly found his train of thought once again. With his strong spiritual perception and extreme familiarity with cogitation, he barely escaped the influence of the midnight poem. However, he remained serene and could hardly evoke any emotions. Soon, Leonard stopped singing as he turned his head with a smile. I'm considering asking Captain's permission to apply for a Fenner lute. How can there not be an accompaniment when singing? Hey, I'm just kidding. I can hear them asleep. The black-haired, green-eyed talk with his poetic vibe took a stride forward and walked to the door that separated them from the kidnappers and hostage. He suddenly moved his shoulder and threw a punch at the door's lock. Crack! The wooden board around the lock shattered in a muffled manner. This requires precise control. Leonard turned his head and smiled. He then reached his hand into the hole and opened the door. Klein, who had regained consciousness, was not as confident as him. He reached under his armpit, drew his revolver, and turned the cylinder, making sure that he could shoot at a moment's notice. As the door swung back, he saw a man sleeping on a table with a gun by his feet. Another man was rubbing his eyes in a daze while trying to stand up. Boom! Leonard slid forward and struck the awakening kidnapper unconscious. Klein planned to enter as well when he suddenly sensed something. He turned around abruptly and faced the stairwell. Tap, tap, tap. Footsteps were approaching from below. It became clear that something was a hatless man in a brown coat circling the stairwell in his progression toward the 3rd floor while hugging a paper bag of bread. Suddenly, he stopped. He saw a gun's barrel aiming at him with a metallic luster. His pupils reflected a young man dressed in a half-top hat, black formal suit with a bow tie of the same color. It also reflected the cane which rested along the rail and the dangerous revolver. Do not move. Raise your hands. 3, 2, 1. Klein's tone was deep but relaxed. He held the revolver with both hands as he tried to imagine the man as a target from his practice. Amid the tense atmosphere, the man in the brown coat threw the bag of bread and slowly raised his hands. Sir, is this a kind of a joke? Has there been a misunderstanding? He stared intently at the finger that Klein had placed on the trigger as he forced a smile. Klein was temporarily unable to determine if he was an accomplice or a neighbor, but he did not reveal any abnormalities. He said in a deep voice, do not attempt to resist. Someone will determine if it's a misunderstanding in a while. At that moment, Leonard, who had finished handling the kidnappers, walked out and noticed the man in the stairwell. He said leisurely, so the kidnappers have another accomplice responsible for buying and delivering food. Upon hearing this, the man's pupils constricted as he suddenly raised his foot and kicked the bag of bread up in an attempt to block Klein's vision. Seemingly unaffected, Klein coldly pulled the trigger like his usual training. Bang! Blood burst out from the man's left shoulder. He tumbled to the ground and attempted to escape from the 2nd floor. However, Leonard had already reached his hand towards the handrail before leveraging himself to jump over. With a dull thud, Leonard landed on the man from above. The man fainted as Leonard swatted away some of the blood that had splattered on him. He looked up at Klein and chuckled. Nice shooting. I was trying to hit his legs. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched in an indiscernible manner as he caught a whiff of the smell of blood. He discovered that despite not having any enhancements to his visual, auditory, or tactile senses after consuming the seer potion, he could still see obstructed objects and hear faint footsteps, allowing him to take preemptive judgment. Was this in the scope of spiritual perception? Klein nodded in thought as he watched Leonard find the sharp dagger in the accomplice's possession and drag him into the room. With a gun and cane in each hand, Klein entered the kidnapper's room. They saw Elliot Vitroy jolt awake from the gunshot as he straightened his body and sat up slowly from a huddled position. Leonard had securely tied up the 3 kidnappers with the rope they used against Elliot. Bunched together, they were thrown in a corner. The lack of rope was made up by tearing their clothes. The unconscious man who had been shot in the shoulder was bandaged, but Leonard disdained getting his hands dirty, so he did not help him extract the bullet. Who are you people? Elliot stammered in pleasant delight when he saw the scene before him. Yes, you guessed right. Very precise. The genuflecting Leonard answered casually. I never expected this bastard to have some humor cells in him. Klein lowered his revolver and said to Elliot, we are mercenaries hired by your father. You can also call us security personnel. Phew, for real, have I been saved? Elliot said joyfully without daring to make any movements. It was apparent that he had suffered quite harshly in the short few hours of being a kidnapping victim. He did not have the kind of rashness someone his age normally would have. Leonard stood up and said to Klein, go downstairs and find some patrolling cops. Get them to inform the tobacco merchant. I do not wish to walk out with a child, and for idiots like a kidnapper. Klein, who was wondering about the aftermath, nodded. He put away his revolver, picked up his cane, and walked to the staircase. As he went down the stairs, he had a nagging feeling that he had forgotten something. In addition, he heard Leonard say to Elliot, don't be nervous. You will soon see your father, mother, and your old butler, Clee. Why don't we play a round of Quint? Klein held back his laughter and walked out into the streets. With the help of pedestrians, he found 2 patrolling policemen. He did not use his badge and identification as a member of the Special Operations Department. Instead, he used his identity as a professional security company and recounted the happenings factually. As for him holding a gun, he was not worried at all. He had received an all-purpose weapon usage certificate the day before yesterday. His application was accelerated by going through internal channels. The 2 policemen exchanged looks and one of them left to gather reinforcements and inform the Vitroy family. The other policeman followed Klein to the kidnapper's room. After waiting for more than 40 minutes, Leonard signaled to Klein while the policeman was not paying attention. Klein was to sneak out of the room with him. Trust me, heading to the police station is an extreme waste of time. Let's leave first, then talk with the poetic Baring explained with a relaxed look. Since Leonard was making it clear that he would take any responsibility for any repercussions, he did not retort and followed in tow. Almost 5 minutes later, a few carriages rushed to the building where the kidnappers were. The old butler, Clee, disembarked with his portly master, Vitroy. Up to this moment in time, he was still in a daze. He found it incredulous that news would come so fast. It felt like a dream. Suddenly, he heard a crisp snap as he turned around. A 2-wheeled carriage drove past with its windows open. The black-haired and green-eyed Leonard had snapped his fingers again. After passing by Vitroy's carriage, Leonard closed the window, turned around, and looked at Klein. He extended his right hand and smiled. It was a pleasure working with you. I don't think we are on the good terms. Klein politely shook his head. He did not expect the kidnapping case to be resolved so quickly. All he could do was marvel at the capabilities of Beyonders. Even though he was just a half-assed Sequence 9 Beyonder, he was able to do many inconceivable things. This is a celebratory gesture of peace among aristocrats after a clash of swords, explained Leonard with a smile. I know. Klein had many aristocratic classmates. He looked outside the window and said with a frown, shouldn't we confirm with Mr. Clee? If he believes that the police rescued Elliot, our commission will be halved. A total of £100. There was no doubt about their providing of the kidnapper's location from their meeting from before. Don't mind it. To us, money isn't that important, says Leonard with a shrug. It's very important to me. Klein forced a polite smile and said, many poets died early from poverty. Leonard chuckled. I believe Elliot would not lie on this matter. I can tell that he still has some of his innocence left in him. However, you will not get much of the £200 commission either. How much would I get? Asked Klein immediately. As the unspoken rule has always been, half of the commission would be handed to Mrs. Oriana as additional funding for the team. The remaining would be split among members. A pity you aren't a formal member. You will only get about 10% of the remaining half. £10? That isn't bad either. Klein pretended to feel the pinch as he asked. Aren't you worried that the kidnappers will realize that they were under the influence of a Beyonder's powers after they wake up? They will not suspect anything. They will only believe that the weather was good and very conducive for sleeping, leading to them dozing off. They will even believe that the sun existed only in their dreams. This is something we have verified before, answered Leonard very confidently. Instead, it's your demon-hunting bullets that might arouse suspicion. Of course, you being a queer who enjoys mysticism would be a perfectly reasonable explanation. I see. Klein was relieved. He just kept feeling like he had forgotten or overlooked something. After returning to Jartland Street, Klein did not wait for Clee's arrival. He strolled to Welsh's place and took a different route home. On the way, he bought some beef and olives for dinner. The meal was enjoyable as always, with the same 3 siblings chatting idly. However, there was an additional visitor. He was a worker responsible for collecting 1 penny for the gas meter. The evening grew dark as the siblings bade each other good night and returned to their rooms. Klein was sleeping soundly when he was suddenly awoken by something familiar outside. He opened the door in puzzlement and arrived outside the bedroom that no one stayed in. He pushed open the mottled door and saw a grey desk. There was a notebook on the table and its cover was made of hard paper. It was completely black in color. A baffling sense of déjà vu arose in him as he walked over and opened the notebook. The page he flipped open to was of a picture of someone dressed in gorgeous clothes and splendid headdress. The fool. Beneath the fool was a line in Hermes. Everyone will die, including me. Horror gripped Klein's heart as he suddenly realized that the corner of the fool's mouth was curving up. F. He sat up in shock as he saw crimson moonlight penetrate his curtains. He saw his bookshelf and desk and the silhouette of his own bedroom. He realized that he had had a nightmare. As a seer, he knew what dreams typically portend. Therefore, he began to seriously search through his recollections. Klein froze up when he did because he knew what he had missed out on today. While he was immersed in Leonard's singing, he had sensed a formless and indifferent focus on his back. The feeling of being observed felt different from the usual cogitation or experience he had from using spirit vision. It gave him a sense of déjà vu. According to Captain Dunn, once a feeling of déjà vu aroused in him, it probably means. Klein suddenly sat straight and confirmed the feeling. Yes, it's that notebook, that Antigonus family's notebook. The Antigonus notebook is in the apartment across the kidnappers. Although it was very coincidental, Klein believed that his intuition was correct. He immediately got out of bed and rapidly changed out of the old clothes he usually wore to bed. He picked up the white shirt beside him and draped it on, quickly buttoning from top to bottom. 1, 2, 3 he suddenly realized that he was missing buttons. The left and right sides did not seem to match. On careful look, Klein realized that he had made a mistake buttoning the first button, causing the shirt to warp. He shook his head helplessly before taking a deep breath and slowly breathing out, using some of his cogitation techniques to restore his calm. After putting on his white shirt and black trousers, he barely managed to wear his armpit holster steadily. He pulled out a revolver he hid under his soft pillow and holstered it. Without time to tie a bow tie, he draped his formal suit on and with a hat and cane in each hand, he walked to the door. After putting on his halved-top hat, Klein gently twisted the door handle and walked into the corridor. He carefully closed his bedroom's wooden door and sneaked downstairs like a thief. He used a fountain pen and paper in the living room to leave a note, informing his siblings that he had forgotten to mention that he had to be early for work today. The moment he was out the door, Klein felt a cool breeze and his entire being calmed down. The street in front of him was dark and silent without any pedestrians. Only the gas lamps illuminated the streets. Klein took out his pocket watch from his pocket and snapped it open. It was just 6 in the morning, and the crimson moonlight had not completely faded away. However, there was a hue of sunrise over the horizon. He was just about to seek out an expensive for-hire carriage when he saw a 2-horse, 4-wheeled trackless carriage approaching him. There are public carriages this early in the morning. Klein was puzzled as he went forward and waved for it to stop. Good morning, sir. The carriage driver stopped the horses skillfully. The ticketing officer beside him had his hand to his mouth while yawning. To Jartland Street, Klein scooped out 2 pennies from his pocket and 4 halfpence. 4 pence, the ticketing officer replied without any hesitation. After paying for the ride, Klein got onto the carriage and found it empty. It exuded a clear loneliness amid the dark night. You are the first one, said the carriage driver with a smile. The 2 brown horses widened their pace as they proceeded briskly. To be honest, I never imagined there to be a public carriage so early in the morning. Klein sat near the carriage driver and made idle chatter to divert his attention and relax his tense mind. The carriage driver said in a self-deprecating manner, from 6 in the morning to 9 at night, but all I earn is £1 a week. Are there no breaks? Inquired Klein in bafflement. We take shift to rest once a week. The carriage driver's tone turned heavy. The ticketing officer beside him added, we are in charge of plying the streets from 6 to 11 in the morning. Following that, we have lunch and an afternoon break. Near dinner time, which is 6 in the evening, we replace our colleagues even if we do not need rest. The 2 horses will need it. It wasn't anything like that in the past. There was an accident that should not have happened. Due to fatigue, a carriage driver lost control of his carriage and it toppled. It resulted in us having shifts those bloody suckers would never become this kind so suddenly otherwise. The carriage driver scoffed. Under the illumination of dawn, the carriage drove towards Jartland Street and picked up 7 to 8 passengers on the way. After Klein was less tense, he did not converse further. He closed his eyes and recalled the experiences from yesterday, hoping to notice if he had forgotten anything. By the time the skies were bright, when the sun was fully up, the carriage finally arrived at Jartland Street. Klein pressed his hat with his left hand and briskly jumped off the carriage. He quickly stepped into 36 Jartland Street and arrived outside Blackthorn Security Company after going up the flight of stairs. The door was still closed and had yet to open. Klein took out the ring of keys by his waist and found the corresponding brass key and inserted it into the keyhole and twisted it. He pushed forward as the door slowly opened. He saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell sniffing at a recently popular cigarette. To be honest, I prefer cigars. You seem to be in a rush, the poet like Talk asked in a relaxed and cozy manner. Where's Captain? Klein asked instead of answering. Leonard pointed at the partition. He's in the office. As an advanced sleepless, he only needs 2 hours of sleep in the day. I believe it's a potion those factory owners or bankers would like the most. Klein nodded and quickly passed through the partition. He saw that Dunn Smith had opened the door to his office and he was standing at its entrance. What's the matter? Dressed in his black windbreaker, he held a gold-inlaid cane with a solemn and stern expression. The feeling of déjà vu came to me. It should be the notebook, the Antigonus family's notebook. Klein tried hard to make his answer clear and logical. Where was that? Dunn Smith's expression did not have any obvious changes. However, Klein's intuition told him that a clear and invisible stir had happened in him. This was possibly a flash of his spirit or a change in his emotions. It's at the place Leonard and I saved the hostage yesterday. opposite the kidnapper's room. I didn't notice it back then until I had a dream and received a revelation. Klein did not conceal anything. From the looks of it, I missed out on making huge contributions. Leonard, who had walked to the partition, chuckled. Dunn nodded slightly as he instructed with a solemn expression, "Get Kenley to replace old Neil's watch of the armory. Let old Neil and Fry come with us." Leonard stopped acting frivolous as he immediately informed Kenley and Fry, who were in Talk's entertainment room. One of them was a sleepless, and the other was a corpse collector. 5 minutes later, the two-wheeled carriage that came under the jurisdiction of the Talks began driving down the sparse streets in the morning. Leonard wore a feather hat, a shirt and a vest. He stood in as the carriage driver, lashing out a whip from time to time, sending out a crisp crack. Inside the carriage, Klein and old Neil sat on one side. Facing them were Dunn, Smith and Fry. The corpse collector's skin was so white it looked like it either had not been under the sun in a very long while, or he had a severe blood deficiency. He looked to be in his 30s with black hair and blue eyes. He had a high nose bridge, and his lips were very thin. He had a cold and dark demeanor, and had a faint smell from often touching corpses. Repeat the situation again in detail. Dunn adjusted the collar of his black windbreaker. Klein stroked the hanging topaz in his sleeve as he began from their mission commissioning until the dream. By the side, old Neil chuckled. "Your fate seems to be entwined with that Antigonus family's notebook. I never expected you to meet it in such a manner." "That's right. Isn't this too much of a coincidence?" Thankfully, Leonard just mentioned that there was no indication of hidden factions of mysterious powers at play from the preliminary investigations of Elliott's kidnapping. It was solely a crime motivated by money. Otherwise, I would really suspect if someone had deliberately arranged for this to happen. Klein found the situation rather curious. It was too coincidental. Dunn did not express his ideas as he was in deep thought. Likewise, corpse collector Fry maintained his silence in his black windbreaker. Only when the carriage stopped at the building mentioned by Klein was the silence broken. "Let's go up. Klein, you and old Neil walk behind." "Be careful, very careful." Dunn got off the carriage and pulled out a strange revolver with a clearly long and thick barrel. He stuffed it into his right pocket. All right, Klein did not dare take point. After Leonard found someone to watch the carriage, the 5 Beyonders walked orderly into the building. With very light footsteps, they arrived at the 3rd floor. "Is this the place?" Leonard pointed at the apartment opposite the kidnappers. Klein tapped his glabella twice and activated his spirit vision. In this state, his spiritual perception was enhanced again. He found the door familiar as if he had once entered it before. Yes, he nodded in affirmation. Old Neil also activated his spiritual perception, and after observing carefully, he said, "There's no one inside, nor are there any spiritual glows of magic." Corpse collector Fry added with his hoarse voice, "There aren't any evil spirits." He could see many spiritual bodies, including evil spirits and restless wraiths, even without activating his spirit vision. Leonard took a step forward and, like yesterday, punched the door's lock. This time not only did the surrounding wood shatter, even the door lock flew and fell noisily to the ground. Klein seemed to feel an invisible seal instantly vanish. Immediately following that, he caught a whiff of an intense stench. "Corpse, a rotting corpse," Fry described coldly. He did not appear to suffer from nausea. Dunn reached out his black gloved right hand and pushed open the door slowly. The first thing that they saw was a chimney. For early July, there was an abnormal heat emanating the room. In front of the chimney was a rocking chair. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Her head hung low. Her body was abnormally large. Her skin was blackish green and swollen. It felt like she would explode from a simple prod, spewing a foul rotting stench from within. As maggots and other parasites squirmed between her flesh, blood, and rotting juices, or curls and wrinkles, they appeared like points of light in spirit vision. They seemed to cling close to an extinguished darkness. Pa, pa, the old woman's eyeballs dropped to the floor and rolled a few times, leaving behind a yellowish-brown streak. Klein felt disgusted and being unable to tolerate the putrid stench any longer, he bent over and puked. Klein squatted there, vomiting involuntarily. He was soon done with his puking, since he did not eat breakfast. At that moment, a tin-colored square flask that looked like a cigarette box appeared in front of him. The mouth which had lost its stopper emitted a mixture of smells akin to tobacco, disinfectant, and mint leaves. It cleared up Klein's nose and rejuvenated him. The pungent smell continued to linger, but Klein no longer felt nauseous. He soon stopped vomiting. He traced the tiny flask up and saw a pale hand that did not seem to belong to a member of the living. He saw the mouth of a black windbreaker's sleeve and saw corpse collector Fry with his cold and dark bearing. "Thank you." Klein recovered completely, and with his hands on his knees, he stood back up. Fry nodded without any expression. "It'll be fine once you are used to it." He put back the flask's stopper and put it into his pocket and turned around, walking to the highly decomposed corpse. Without gloves, he began examining the old woman. As for Dunn Smith and Leonard Mitchell, they paced slowly around the room, occasionally touching the table's surface or newspapers. Old Neil pinched his nose and stood outside the door, grumbling in a muffled voice, seriously gross. "I'm going to request for additional pay this month." Dunn turned his head over and touched the wall beside the chimney with his gloved right hand. While doing so, he asked Klein, "Does this place look familiar?" Klein held his breath and constructed the silver pocket watch in his mind to calm down. With him already in his spirit vision state, he immediately felt different. A scene that came from the deepest recesses of his memories flashed past his eyes. chimney, rocking chair, table, newspapers, the rusty nails on the door, the tin cans inlaid with silver. The scenes were dark and dull, like a documentary from Earth. However, it was even more blurry and illusory. The scene quickly stacked against what Klein was seeing. The feelings of déjà vu and having been here before presented themselves clearly. An illusory and ethereal stream seemed to pass through invisible walls. Hornus Ice Fligria, Hornus Ice Fligria, Hornus Ice Fligria. It feels a little familiar, Klein answered honestly while his brain felt a stabbing pain. Thankfully, he quickly tapped his glabella twice. Hornus Ice, the Hornus Ice mountain range that appeared in original Klein's diary. That is content that was deciphered from the Antigonus family's notebook. The murmurs were very similar to one of the previous ones. It involved the word Hornus Ice. Is this a form of enticement? Klein was gripped by shock as he did not dare think deeper, afraid that he would place himself on the trajectory of losing control. Dunn nodded slightly and walked to a cupboard. He suddenly reached out his hand and pulled open its wooden door. The bread inside was mouldy, and there were about 7 grey, stiff-dead rats. Leonard, go downstairs to get patrolling cops and explain the situation here, instructed Dunn. All right. Leonard turned and left the apartment. Following that, Dunn opened the door to 2 other bedrooms and did a careful search. After being certain that there were no clues as well as any sign of the Antigonus family's notebook, Fry also stood up. He wiped his hands with a white handkerchief he brought along with him and said, the time of death was more than 5 days ago. There are no external injuries, nor are there any clear signs that it was a result of beyond their powers. The exact cause of death will require a post-mortem. Did you discover anything? Dunn turned to look at old Neil and Klein. The 2 who were no longer in spirit vision state shook their heads in unison. Apart from the corpse, everything else is normal. Actually, no, there was an invisible energy sealing the apartment in the beginning. As you know, there will usually be similar processes when we use ritualistic magic. Old Neil thought for a few seconds before adding. Dunn was just about to say something when he looked outside the door. A few seconds later, Klein and old Neil sensed something and turned to look at the stairwell. A few seconds later, faint footsteps grew louder as Leonard walked up with a policeman. The policeman's expression changed once he caught the noxious smell. He immediately cooperated with his colleague from the Special Operations Department and began knocking on the doors of the residents on the 2nd floor to gain an understanding of the situation on the 3rd floor. Moments later, the corporal with his 2 silver chevrons looked at the corpse on the rocking chair. Kathy Stefania Bieber, between 55 and 60 years old. Widow, has rented this apartment with her son, Ray Bieber, for more than 10 years. Her husband was formerly a gem artisan. Her son is about 30 years old and is single. He inherited his father's trade and earns about £1 and 15 soldi a week. According to their neighbours, they have not seen them in more than a week. Before the policeman continued, Klein already knew the critical point that followed. Missing. To be more precise, it was unknown where Ray Bieber had gone to. The ancient notebook could very well be on him. Do you have a picture of Ray Bieber? Dunn looked at the police officer. He was acting as the role of a high-ranking inspector. However, it was not really acting since he was indeed a high-ranking inspector on the police department's roster. His salary and various allowances were also paid according to his rank. Of course, it did not include his salary from the church. The police officer shook his head nervously and said, I'm not sure. I'll have to return to the station to search for it. It's not typical for us to have pictures of every single person. Got it. Continue questioning the residents on the 1st floor. Ask them in detail. Dunn gave the order. As he watched the police officer leave, he closed the door and turned to old Neil. I'll leave the rest to you. If not, we will have to make all the residents sleep and obtain Ray Bieber's looks. Yay, I don't really trust sketches based on verbal descriptions. Old Neil nodded. He took out a few thumb-sized bottles from a pocket of his black classic robe and scattered the liquids in a particular order. Immediately following that, he pulled out a clump of powder and scattered it in a circle around him. Strangely, a biting smell spread and was not influenced by the nauseating smells in the room. Klein also suddenly noticed that there was an invisible force field around him. It separated him from the environment and everyone else. It was like the room in its previous state. Old Neil half closed his eyes as his lips mumbled a soft and indiscernible incantation. Without being prepared, Klein vaguely heard the words, Goddess, give me strength. We look forward to the protection of the night. Hum. A sudden wind tore through the windows and blew up the powder. Klein's heart quaked suddenly as he felt gauzy bumps all over him. He found it difficult to describe. A terrifying smell that made him afraid of looking directly spread rapidly. He was confused as he tensed up, unable to relax. It felt as though he had plunged into a state similar to what one would have after working on a highly advanced mathematical problem. Suddenly, old Neil's eyes opened, his eyes pitch black. He took out a fountain pen from his pocket and began drawing on a piece of scrap paper on the table. He was so fast that his entire body was trembling. Klein focused his gaze and saw a face with recessed eyes and a tall nose bridge rapidly appear. When the natural curly short hair was done, old Neil wrote a single line beneath the portrait. Black hair, deep blue eyes, left of his mouth is a fully ceramic tooth implant. Padda. The fountain pen in old Neil's hand fell onto the paper as his body convulsed a few times. This is the image of Ray Bieber according to what's left in the room, old Neil whispered as the colour of his eyes restored rapidly. Then, he turned back to his original spot and slowly circled it. The invisible force field that isolated things immediately dissipated in the form of a breeze. Praise the lady. Old Neil tapped his chest in 4 spots, forming the shape of the crimson moon. Klein's taut nerves relaxed as he made more acute observations. He discovered that there was nothing special about Ray Bieber's facial features. He had a relatively mild bearing. The only thing was that his philtrum sagged clearly. I'll try using dowsing rod seeking. He picked up the portrait and found male clothes in the bedroom and spread them onto the ground. Done, Leonard and old Neil did not stop him as they watched him place the black cane above the clothes and portrait. Fry was as silent as always. Klein's eyes turned from brown to black as he finished his recitation, only to release his grip. The black cane stood silently like it was embedded in the ground. Ray Bieber's location, Klein silently repeated to himself again. With the sound of humming wind, the cane fell down but kept changing directions while falling. Finally, it began spinning in slight circles. Without any external help, the black cane stood still again. Klein repeated a few times with the same outcome. All he could do was shake his head down at old Neil. A strange power was interfering with his divination. Dunn took off his black glove and said to Leonard and Klein, "Take Ray Bieber's portrait and inquire the residence for a final confirmation. Following that, we will issue a warrant of arrest against him for the murder of his mother." All right. Klein held his cane and bent down to pick the portrait. After the neighbors confirmed that the portrait was indeed Ray Bieber, Dunn instructed Leonard and the police officer to finish the procedures at the station. He and Fry headed to a few bars in Tingen City to seek help via other means. Klein and old Neil returned to Blackthorn Security Company on a public carriage. It was not even 8 by the time they arrived. Roseanne had not even clocked in. After closing the door, Klein cocked his head at old Neil and, hoping to learn and answer his questions, asked him, "Why would I send the Antigonus family's notebook to Ray Bieber's home?" This was completely in a different direction from Iron Cross Street where Welsh stayed. Old Neil walked to the sofa and chuckled. "Isn't that obvious? Who knows what powers inside the notebook you invoked? Maybe you did some described ritual out of curiosity and ended up provoking a strange existence that you should not have. The motive of this existence was to have the notebook sent to Ray Bieber and several clues, to prevent anyone from discovering it. Therefore, apart from you who were selected, Welsham then committed suicide. Regarding you, to be frank, I still have no idea how you survived. I would like to know too." Klein sat down as well as he deliberately replied with a wry smile. "I've also thought of the guesses you have of the proceedings. However, there's one thing I don't understand. Why did I hope to hand the notebook to Ray Bieber?" Old Neil shrugged and said, "Perhaps his life path number 1 matches the requirements, or maybe he's one of the last remaining descendants of the Antigonus family. In short, there are too many possibilities, and why the notebook was sold to Tingen City would have similar reasons. I do not think it's because he's a descendant." Klein suddenly felt enlightened before he sighed. "Unfortunately, I did not discover immediately that Ray Bieber and that notebook have vanished." Old Neil laughed. "This is something that Dunn has to worry about. As for you, it's something good." "Why do you say so?" Klein frowned in puzzlement. "A life path number was proposed by Pythagoras, which is established from the date of birth and describes the nature of one's journey through life." Old Neil rubbed his temples and said, "I believe we have a general idea of why the 3 of you engaged in a mass suicide. That notebook is also now purportedly in Ray Bieber's hands. Furthermore, the matter has already been exposed. Regardless of whether you are alive or dead, it will hardly influence any subsequent developments. I believe that the surreptitious existence or mysterious power that caused all of this will not pay you any special attention. It's just like how you would not pay attention to the ants on the ground. Hey, as long as you do not try to make him recall you. And our arrest warrant for Ray Bieber will quickly reach the secret order. They will also be able to guess that it is related to the Antigonus family's notebook. Believe me, for a secret organization that has been in existence for more than 1,000 years, it has many channels of information. Therefore, their focus will be diverted to Ray Bieber's whereabouts in a bid to find the notebook before us. They will not, nor is it possible for them to harass, stalk, or deal with you. Lad, congratulations on stepping out from the shadows of the past. What follows will be a brand new journey filled with sunlight." Klein nodded when he heard that, as he said in a happy and relieved manner, "I hope so." Having transmigrated here, he had been enveloped in uncertainty. Now, it felt like it had finally dissipated. However, Klein was still feeling uncertain because the notebook seemed to be tied to him in a certain manner. It went to the point of him bumping into remnant clues coincidentally from a normal mission of rescuing a hostage. He was afraid that there would come a day when a delivery man would send him a parcel, only to realize that it was the Antigonus family notebook after opening it up. Let's hope everything will go as old Neil described, he silently prayed. When old Neil heard his reply, he immediately scoffed. "You don't seem to be a devout believer of the goddess. At this moment, shouldn't you be drawing the sign of the crimson moon at your chest and say, 'May goddess bless us'? Mr. Neil, you don't seem like one either. A real devotee would not say, 'What follows will be a brand new journey filled with sunlight.'" Having been studying mysticism under old Neil, Klein had established a decent friendship with him. So he did not stand on ceremony to return a sarcastic remark. Both of them locked eyes and chuckled with great rapport. At the same time, they tapped their chests 4 times. Praise the lady. At that moment, they heard the grinding sounds of machinery as the main door to Blackthorn Security Company opened. The elegant Mrs. Oriana with her fashionably coiled hair stepped into the reception hall with a light green dress. "Good morning, Mr. Neil. Good morning, Klein." She held a small leather handbag as she greeted with a smile. "It's another fabulous day today. A pretty good day." "Good morning, Oriana. You are still as beautiful as 10 years ago," replied old Neil with a chuckle. Oriana's eyes turned to slits as she upturned her face. "Mr. Neil, the way you praise is still as infuriating as 10 years ago." She enunciated the words, 10 years. Is that so? Old Neil looked at Klein, confused. He wore a perplexed look. Never mention anything that will remind the ladies of their age as a keyboard warrior that knew a little of everything. Klein instantly understood what had peeved Mrs. Oriana. He smiled lightly and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Oriana. You are as beautiful as always." "Thank you, our outstanding co-university graduate." Oriana smiled with a nod before saying that old Butler has already paid the missions commission. "According to Captain's rules, half of it will be used as additional funds, while the other half will be split between you and Leonard. But since you aren't a formal member, you can only take 10% of the half. Come over later to sign for it." "How much did he pay?" Klein asked happily while also feeling the pinch. £200. This was what he said back then, Lord, the esteemed Storm. I never imagined or believed that this was resolved just like that. This is even harder than us having a dream. Why is your security company so unknown? It's an insult to the entire industry. Mrs. Oriana mimicked the old butler's southern accent. Klein thought seriously for a few seconds before saying humorously, "This is just too unfair for those kidnappers." Two Beyonders had resolved the problem quickly using methods that could be described as easy and pleasant. This is like an adult bullying a few kids while in full combat attire. They were just too unlucky. They must have lost the protection of the divine, said Oriana with a soft laugh. I told the butler that we were only lucky. One of our informants happened to see the kidnappers bring the child into the hideout. Therefore, do not have too much hopes for us. We really are just a very ordinary security company. Typically speaking, the more you emphasize something is ordinary, the more extraordinary it is. Klein lampooned with a smile. He watched Mrs. Oriana walk through the partition and enter the accounting room. Old Neil puckered his lips by the side and said enviously, "You really are a lucky lad. You haven't joined us for long, and you've encountered a job worth £200. Is that very rare?" Klein asked in puzzlement. Prior to this, he was either studying history or mysticism, or wandering aimlessly outside, hoping to find clues with his spiritual perception. According to Oriana's accounts, we might not encounter a single job an entire week. And most jobs are worth less than £20. Old Neil rubbed the moonstone by his wrist and sighed. Following that, he looked at Klein with anticipation. "If you encounter any similar jobs in the future, remember to inform me." Upon hearing old Neil's words, Klein suddenly felt a strange feeling arise in him. Therefore, he asked directly, "Mr. Neil, you seem to be lacking in money. How much do you get paid a week?" "If you aren't comfortable telling me, just ignore my question." Old Neil leaned back into the sofa and chuckled. "This isn't something that needs hiding. I've been here for so many years. At present, I would obtain salaries from both the church and the police department every week, a total of £12. "A weekly salary of £12? Klein blurted out in surprise. "A weekly salary of £12 with 52 weeks a year, that meant more than £600 a year." Back when he read the Tingeon Morning Post and Honest paper, they had mentioned that high-profile lawyers only earned £800 to £1,000 a year. And those were the best lawyers. As for the managers of Benson's trading company, they only earned £6 a week. That was already quite a decent job. "Yes, such a salary is actually quite generous, and we do not need to pay any taxes," added old Neil with a smile. Klein had heard from Benson that one had to pay E-type taxes when their weekly salaries exceeded £1. In other words, the government and corporate employees had to pay 3% of taxes if they earned £1 to £2, 5% for £2 to £5, 10% for £5 to £10, and 15% for £10 to £20, capping at 20% for those above £20. Other than that, you also read of 4 other kinds of taxes on the newspapers. A type was related to land, housing, and other earnings from material items. It included property and rent. B-type was a tax paid by farmers. C-type was a tax on profits from bonds, funds, and equities. D-type was commercial, finance, or professional income. "It's something admirable," Klein echoed old Neil. However, old Neil shook his head. "Such a salary is insufficient for beyonders like us who have to frequently study the hidden mysteries, practice and attempt rituals." "Aren't materials obtainable via application?" asked Klein in puzzlement. Old Neil coughed. "There's a limitation to it. At times, we have to give a sufficient legitimate reason. If you want to learn more and experiment in the field of mysticism, you can only spend your own dime to buy materials. It can be bought internally or at underground markets." Klein jolted in surprise as he immediately asked, "There are Beyonder materials that are sold in underground markets? I thought the churches would not permit their existence." He was lacking in means to obtain materials. With him having a mysterious organization in its nascent stages, he could not always have them settled via the talks, right? There's no way to control such matters. Yeah, from the viewpoint of mysticism, all beings are sentient with their spirits and they stem from the same source. The materials we use are not limited to those extraordinary creatures. It also comes from ordinary animals, plants, and minerals. For example, the poison hemlock, gold mint leaves, and night vanilla in the bottle of Seer potion, they are items we can encounter frequently in our daily lives. They might not have any extraordinary characteristics, but they have special characteristics. Through concoction and blending, they will derive certain effects. Therefore, this is not a trade that the church can ban, explained old Neil in detail. Without waiting for Klein to say a word, he continued, "Besides, it's not only the core of extraordinary beings that are of use. For example, the larva squid. Apart from its blood, its eyeballs, skin, and tentacles are pretty good materials. Unless the church captures it entirely with its own manpower, to completely corner and control any outflows would be a tremendous financial burden. The lower the grade of the extraordinary material, the more it is so. They can only do their best to prevent the more special materials from flowing out. Old Neil suddenly laughed. There's another important reason. It's better to know of an underground market than not knowing of it. Under the premise that secret organizations have not been fully eliminated, this is a pretty good strategy. Besides, it can help us obtain materials we are lacking. Of course, with the existence of such markets, contraband items will appear. As long as it's not something ridiculous or overly dangerous, we will turn a blind eye to it. At most, we would use them to enrich our vaults. Is it because the few large churches put each other in place, so no one can take excessive action? Klein guessed. Old Neil acknowledged tersely but did not elaborate. I must say, in the future, I'll definitely need to practice and will need more materials. Mr. Neil, can you take me to the underground market to have a look? Klein requested with a valid reason. Old Neil appeared to be placed in a difficult position. In fact, those guys who are active in those places are mostly not beyonders. Some of them might be aristocrats that like mystery or rich people who have inclinations towards mysticism. All right. I have a £30 bill that needs paying soon. It wouldn't be convenient for me to head over there for the time being. All right, Klein never expected the reason to be old Neil's owing of money. Moments later, he said with deliberation, Mr. Neil, do you need me to lend you money? I just earned a commission of £10. Ha ha, there's no need. I'll be able to settle it. Old Neil patted the sofa and slowly stood up. Sigh, age is truly an enemy that biological creatures can't fight. I'm exhausted from last night's watch. Yeah, revise what I taught you later this morning. Read more documents. Tomorrow, I'll teach you the foundations of ritualistic magic. All right. Klein got up and bade him farewell by taking off his hat. When Captain Dunn did not return at noon, Klein pretended that he was still searching for the notebook as he roamed the streets again. Having earned £10, he no longer needed to wait for the next disbursement of the funds. He could head directly to the Divination Club. Cogitation and spirit vision have been occasionally producing murmurings and illusions. It made him eager to begin acting in the Divination Club situated at the second floor of 13 Howes Street, North Borough of Tingen City. Klein saw the beautiful lady that attended to visitors once again. She was still having her brownish-yellow long hair coiled, making her look mature and elegant. It was hard to tell her age. Hello, Mr. Glassis isn't here today. Would you like to change fortune tellers today? Said the beautiful lady with a smile. Upon hearing that, Klein, who had just taken off his silk hat and put it back on, was immediately surprised. You still remember me? That was already 5 days ago. The woman puckered her lips into a smile. You are the first customer that sought Mr. Glassis' services. You are also the only one to this very day. It's hard for me not to have a deep impression of you. Was this the image of him being penny-wise, pound-foolish? Klein lampooned himself as he deliberated a question. When was the last time Mr. Glassis came to the club? The lady shot a glance at him and answered seemingly in recollection, to be honest, we are unable to grasp when our members will come and go. They have their free will and personal matters to tend to. Well, I do believe that Mr. Glassis hasn't come to the club since he told your fortune that day. I wish him the best of luck. May the goddess bless him. Klein prayed and did not ask further. Instead, he asked with a smile, I'm not here for divination services this time. I plan to join the club. Really, that's our pleasure. The lady expressed a timely look of surprised delight. For the first year as a member, the membership fee is £5. It will be £1 a year thereafter. I believe there's no need for me to describe in the details again. Klein took out a £5 note he recently received as he watched Henry Augustus I's portrait depart him. After seriously checking the anti-counterfeit watermark, the woman stored away the note seriously and handed a form to Klein. Please fill in your detailed information. Let me prepare the receipt for you. There's a receipt. You should bill it to Blackthorn Security Company. Klein was amused by his own thoughts as he picked up a fountain pen on the desk. With the blackish blue ink, he filled in his name, age, address, and company information. However, he had deliberately left his date of birth empty. To a seer, that provided profound mysteries about his body through his life path number. After receiving the receipt and finishing his registration as a member, the lady extended her right hand. Congratulations on joining Tingen City's Divination Club. I'm Angelica by heart, your hard-working server. This is your member cufflinks. There are special inscriptions on them which will identify you as a member. Hello, Madam Angelica. Klein shook her hand and took the dark gold cufflinks. He realized that the special inscription was written with the root word for fortune teller in Hermes. Angelica retracted her left hand and thought for a few seconds. Might I ask what divination arts you are most familiar with? Or would you prefer to learn some divination methods from the club? We will consider inviting famous fortune tellers of the corresponding domain to give classes. We will also introduce you members with similar expertise so that you can have a good time interacting with them. I know a bit of every divination art. There's no need to give me any special considerations, Klein replied with some embellishments. In addition, he inquired, can I begin telling the fortunes of others? I'm not a total rookie. He was here to act as a seer and not learn the divination methods ordinary people could learn. Angelica maintained a polite smile as she said, you can tell the fortunes of people any time in the club. However, before we confirm your skills, we will not promote you when our customers ask. How much do you plan on charging for your fortune telling? 2 pence. Klein decided to gain an advantage with price while he was still unknown. We will go by the standard of taking an eighth. So we will be taking it to our tuppence for fees. Angelica repeated the various rules first before writing Klein's information into the fortune teller album, which customers could choose from. After all of this was done, she pointed at the meeting room at the far end of the corridor with a smile. Mr. Harness Vincent is currently explaining astrolabe divination. You can find a quiet spot to listen in. You can also raise your questions if there are any queries. All right. Klein walked toward the meeting room with his interest piqued. He wanted to know the differences between what Harness Vincent and old Neil said. At that moment, Angelica chased up and whispered, "Mr. Moritti, would you want coffee or tea?" "We provide Side Black Tea, Southville Coffee, and Desire Coffee." Klein, who had been reading the papers regularly, knew that these coffees and black tea were considered as one of the inferior varieties. But he also knew that they were definitely of better quality than the ones he had at home. After some thought, he said, "A cup of Southville coffee. 3 teaspoons of sugar without milk, please." Lowen Kingdom's Southville was famous for its beer and red wine. Many important figures were fond of them. However, their coffee was relatively unknown. "All right, I'll send it to you in a bit." Angelica pointed towards the meeting room. Klein slowly walked to the half-closed door and heard a voice in a thick hour accent explaining, "Astrolabe divination is a relatively more complex one among the divination arts. But that's only for ordinary people." Klein silently tagged on a sentence for the speaker. He saw about 5 tables placed in a circle inside the meeting room. It surrounded a middle-aged man in a black classic robe, Harness Vincent. The gentleman had obvious dark circles. His brown hair was thick and hard. Each strand stood firmly like a porcupine's spikes. Apart from that, there was nothing unique about him. Upon seeing Klein enter, Harness Vincent nodded gently without stopping his class. He only slowed down his speech. Klein had one hand in his pocket, while the other held his cane. He found a seat to the sides and sat down, leaning back comfortably in the process. He scanned the circle of 6 members. There were 4 men and 2 women. Some of them were attentively taking notes, whispering, or returning Klein a rueful smile. After placing his cane down, Klein adjusted his halved top hat and tapped his glabella twice in the process. He cast his gaze at Harness and saw the different colors, brightness, and thickness of his aura. Dark red. He's a little worried actually. Every other part of his body is healthy except that part. I wonder what's wrong. Klein listened to the class while muttering to himself. At that moment, he clasped his right hand and covered his mouth to prevent his laughter from sounding. He suddenly felt like he was a quack. He was rather pleased with his spirit vision ability. Although he could only make a general judgment and not the details, it was enough to gain him many useful information. After surveying his surroundings, he tapped his glabella twice again as though he was pondering over what Harness had just said. Astrolabe divination was one of the astromancy divination methods. However, ordinary people could also attempt to interpret things. For instance, the most basic birth horoscope was to determine the inquirer's fate by determining the positions of the sun, moon, blue and red stars at their birth, the corresponding spots in the sky, matching the representative symbols to the astrolabe, and the corresponding situations of the different constellations. This required the fortune teller to be able to calculate the states of the planets and constellations, which was rather complicated. Of course, there were publications that aided people to look up the values. Some even simplified it by making a vague read with just the constellations. Klein listened silently without interjecting or asking any questions. From time to time, he would caress the hanging topaz at his sleeve or take a sip of the Southville coffee which Angelica had brought in. After some time, Harness rubbed his glabella and said, "Perhaps you will need to attempt at creating your own astrolabe. Ask me if you have any questions. I will be in Moonstone." After he left, a young man in a white shirt and black vest stopped up with a smile and walked to Klein's side. "Nice to meet you. I'm Edward Steve." "My pleasure. I'm Klein Moritti." Klein stood up and returned the bow. "Astrolabes are too complicated. Every time I hear about it, I can't help but doze off," said Edward self-deprecatingly. Klein grinned and said, "That's because Mr. Vincent can't help but pass the knowledge he grasps to us. It's like giving us an Intis feast. It's just indigestible. I'd be able to finish the Intis feast. They usually use a huge plate to serve tiny bits of food." Edward chuckled and sat up. He asked out of curiosity, "Are you new?" "I've not seen you in the 2 years I was here." "I just joined the club today," answered Klein frankly. "What are you good at?" "I'm best at tarot and poker divination," Edward casually asked. "I know a little of everything, but just a little." Klein gave a description he used to give himself. He was not being modest, since there was just too much mysterious knowledge he had not grasped in the domain of divination. Just as the other members were thinking of talking about horoscope divination, Angelica walked into the meeting room. "Mr. Steve, someone wants you to tell their fortunes." "All right." Edward stood up with a smile. "I can tell you are an excellent fortune teller," said Klein as he looked at him. "No, it's because my price is most suitable," said Edward with a soft chortle. "When ordinary people come to have their fortunes told, they will absolutely not choose the most expensive ones. And unless they had their heads kicked by asses, they would definitely not be choosing the cheapest few. It's easiest to gain opportunities if you are in the middle. I'm one of those that had their heads kicked by asses." When he saw Edward leave, Klein suddenly shook his head with a wry smile. "It seems the price I set is problematic." He stood up, picked up his cane, and left the meeting room. He found Angelica again. "I wish to change the prices of my divination." "Ah, set it to 8 pence. Angelica took a deep look at him and said, "We will satisfy your request, but we will also tell customers that you only recently joined the club." "No problem." Klein did not mind as he nodded. At times, mystery was also an important element for a seer to attract customers. After changing his details, Klein returned to the meeting room. At that moment, he saw Harness Vincent walk out of Moonstone. He held a silver-coated mirror. This well-known fortune teller said to the 5 members in the meeting room, "I recently learned a new divination art. Magic mirror divination. Does anyone want to learn?" Magic mirror divination. That's not safe. Klein paused outside the meeting room and frowned. As a seer who had just stepped through the gates of mysticism, Klein did not dare to claim he knew much. However, he was certain he knew more than ordinary people. He was aware that the various kinds of divination arts could be split into 3 categories based on particular standards, and that standard was based on the source of the revelation. The first category of divination included tarot, poker, pendulums, dowsing canes, and dreams. By using the inquirer's own spirituality and its communication with the spirit world to gain a revelation, it could be interpreted for an answer. However, spirit pendulums and dowsing canes had very high requirements of one's spirituality, spirit body, and astral projection. Non-beyonders were unable to obtain precise or clear revelations. Card divination provided fixed symbolism, presenting even an average person's faint revelation. Dreams were somewhere in between the other forms. The second category included spirit numerology and astromancy, as well as their derived forms. The fortune teller used either the personal details of the inquirer or changes in nature before using calculations, inference, and interpretation to answer their questions. With this method, the initiative did not lie in the inquirer, but the fortune teller. The third category used an external third party, separate from the inquirer and the fortune teller. The Ouija boards that Klein was familiar with from his previous life belonged in this category. They used rituals to ask for a direct answer from the unknown or the supernatural. Even though there was a high chance that an average person would not succeed, there were cases where they managed to communicate with malicious spirits or entities that drove them to insanity. These methods of divination usually led to tragedies. The magic mirror divination that Harness Vincent mentioned belonged to the third category. In mysticism, mirrors were connected to the unknown and mystery, like they were the doors of the spiritual world. Thus, Klein stopped outside the meeting room, intending to learn how the famous fortune teller would explain the divination. Klein wanted to ascertain if he needed to inform the captain or not, raiding him at night. Of course, there was a safe way to do the magic mirror divination. One could ask for answers from the 7 orthodox divinities. Even if it was very difficult for an ordinary person to receive any real revelations, they would not be in any danger or suffer any after effects. The magic mirror divinations that were strictly controlled by the networks and mandated punishers were those that asked evil gods or mysterious existences for help. Furthermore, the fortune teller couldn't randomly fabricate things. Some phrases or qualities had the potential to invite the attention of unknown entities. In the world where the powers of the beyonders exist, such divinations would often lead to tragedy. Klein even suspected that the original Klein, Welsh, and Mayer had committed such a forbidden divination by following the instructions of the Antigonus family's diary. At that moment, Harness also explained the principle behind magic mirror divination and described the actual process. First, you choose a suitable time and date according to the divinity you believe in. You can decide this using the astromancy manual. For example, we all know that Sundays symbolize the evernight goddess, for Sunday is the embodiment of rest. 2 to 3 in the early morning, 9 to 10 in the morning, 4 to 5 in the evening, and 11 to midnight are all related to the moon. Thus, they are controlled by the evernight goddess. Thus, fortune tellers that pray to the evernight goddess can use magic mirror divination during these times on a Sunday. Quite a good foundation. Klein nodded slightly while using the half-closed door to the meeting room to conceal himself. It had to be said that with the 7 major churches keeping each other in check, some mysticism knowledge had indeed leaked. For example, many of the meanings behind the symbolism could be found in the astromancy manual. However, without the potions or beyond the powers, ordinary people were unable to obtain the desired effects. Second, we must scrutinize the mirror carefully. It must be a mirror coated with silver. You place the mirror at the position representing the moon. Harness demonstrated with the prop in his hand. No, what he needs now is spirit dowsing. First, choose a position and recite the phrase, "This place is suitable for magic mirror divination," 7 times in your head, then see which direction the pendulum turns. Clockwise for true, counterclockwise for false. Of course, if you are asking for answers from a malicious supernatural entity, the position would not matter. Rather, it would depend on whether the entity is interested in answering your questions. Klein silently corrected him. At this point, he felt like a teacher listening in on a lesson. Harness Vincent could not get Klein's mental musings as he described the preparations in detail in a normal tone. When the members finished taking notes, he continued explaining, after showering, confirm that you have drawn all your curtains and locked your doors. After that, light up a candle and place it in front of the mirror before sincerely praying to the divinity you believe in. Try to keep your questions simple as there's no need for fanciful embellishment. After praying 7 times, pick up your mirror and gently toss it on the ground. Make sure to be gentle. Remember the way it shatters, as that is a revelation from the gods. I will tell you the main symbolisms in a second. Phew, this is orthodox magic mirror divination. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he walked into the meeting room and sat back down in his previous seat. He finished the rest of his Southville coffee in one gulp. So-called orthodox divination meant that it was possible to obtain revelations, but it was impossible to truly interpret it. And for beyonders who reached this step, they could look straight into the mirror to obtain clear information if they received a response. As there were many potential symbolisms after the shattering, Harness talked for a long while. He was not done even when Edward Steve returned to the room after finishing his fortune-telling. Klein did not ask what Edward did for his fortune-telling or what method did he use, since it was an unspoken rule among fortune-tellers. While acting as a seer, he naturally had to abide by it strictly unless the other party mentioned it. I discovered that many a time, our interpretation is too vague, as though it's meeting different requests. allowing different people to find a description of themselves from the interpretation. Edward drank a mouthful of side black tea and said with a soft sigh. For example, those that encounter adversities and calamities will eventually see the light of hope. Hey, but no one knows when the light of hope will come. For example, a journey might not be very smooth sailing, but you will definitely arrive alive. Hair, the dead will not retort me. As he did not listen from the beginning, he ignored Highness's magic mirror divination class. Survival bias, added Klein with a smile. Survival bias generally meant that a lot of statistics would only include those who were alive and lucky. The data would ignore the dead, therefore, the results would be clearly biased. Right, Emperor Cell was really a philosopher, marveled Edward. Speechless, Klein raised his empty cup and pretended to take a sip. The members were fully immersed in the study of horoscopes and magic mirror divination the entire afternoon. Occasionally, they would also discuss with Klein and Edward. And when that happened, Klein would try his best to meet his duty as an informal member of the Nighthawks. He would try hard to steer the topic away from anything related to beyonders or dangerous ideas. However, he failed at the thing he wanted to do the most. A few inquirers came, but none of them picked him to do their fortune-telling. Perhaps I have to be more proactive in entertaining them. Should I use a few phrases like, you are plagued with bad luck, you have been unlucky recently, or nothing you do will happen smoothly? No, that's nothing like a seer with this in mind. Klein could not help but shake his head in self-deprecation. He picked up his cane, stood up, and left after bidding everyone farewell. At 5:30, Edward Steve put on his coat and was prepared to walk out of the divination club when he suddenly saw a familiar figure. Good afternoon, classies. Long time no see, he greeted with a smile. He saw his friend with similar interests as him wear his usual format suit with a black bow tie. In front of his chest hung a monocle. Immediately following that, he noticed that his friend did not look well. Even his soft blonde hair looked dry. Good afternoon, Edward coughed. Glacis with his hat in hand suddenly used his fist to cover his mouth as he coughed a few times. Edward asked out of concern, you seem to be ill? A very serious illness. It even turned into pneumonia. If it wasn't for my wife who met an impressive apothecary and gave me a magical medicine, you would have probably had to visit me at the cemetery. Glacis's tone was filled with lingering fear and joy. Lord, I can't believe it. You were so healthy previously. Look at you, you look so frail now. I remember when I did divination on you, there were no signs that indicated that you would get a serious illness. Edward waved his cane and said with an astonished sigh. My own divination had the same result as yours. Perhaps we are not qualified fortune tellers. Besides, Glacis suddenly recalled the happenings on Monday as his expression turned abnormally serious. At that moment, the beautiful lady, Angelica, came over and bowed with a pleasant smile. After exchanging greetings, she first showed concern for Glacis's health and provided some suggestions. Then, she mentioned in passing, Mr. Glacis, Mr. Moritti, who requested your divination services previously, has joined our club as well. The one who got me to tell his fortune. Glacis's eyes lit up immediately. Lord, where is he? He just left. Angelica and Edward were unable to comprehend Glacis's abnormal reaction. Glacis took 2 steps in agitation and said, the next time he comes, please ask him when he will come if I'm not around. Glacis, what happened? Did that Mr. Klein Moritti do something to you? Asked Edward in puzzlement. Glacis raised his arm and stared straight into Edward's and Angelica's probing gazes. He said in excitement, he's a very magical. He lowered his arm and said after using, thrice, Doctor, 7:30 in the evening, around the Moritti family's dining table. Klein, why do you need to be at work so early as a consultant? Would emergency matters at the security company be more dangerous? Benson forked a potato from a dish of potato stewed beef as he raised the matter in concern. Klein carefully spat out the bones from a pan-fried dish and gave his prepared answer. A batch of historical documents needed immediate shipping to Bagland. I had to be present to handle the handover and make sure there was nothing missing. As you can guess, the bunch of fist-swinging bastards don't know any Fissac. Upon hearing his answer, Benson, who had finished chewing his food, could not help but sigh. Knowledge is truly important. Making use of this opportunity, Klein took out a remaining £5 note and handed it to Benson. This is my additional payment I received today. It's time you get some decent clothes too. £5, Benson and Melissa said in unison. Benson took the note and looked at it repeatedly. He said in both shock and doubt, this security company sure is generous. His weekly salary was £1.10 solly, which meant £6 exactly every 4 weeks. He only earned £1 additional from this additional payment. And with that salary, he had managed to support his siblings, giving them a decent place to stay and allowing them to eat meat 2 to 3 times a week. Every year, they could get a few new clothes. Are you doubting me? Klein deliberately returned with a question. Benson chuckled. I doubt you have the ability nor the guts to rob a bank. You aren't someone who can lie, Melissa answered seriously after lowering her fork and knife. To him now someone used to lying, Klein immediately felt a little ashamed. Although it was a result of the circumstances of his reality, his sister's belief in him left him melancholic. It was relatively urgent and important today. I also played a crucial role, which is the reason for the £5, Klein explained. In a way, what he said was the truth. As for the £5 that he would be reimbursed with the one he would use to join the divination club, he planned on concealing it. Firstly, if he brought £5 home again, he would truly scare his siblings, making them suspect he was doing something illegal. Secondly, he had to save to buy additional materials to practice being a seer and to grasp more mysticism knowledge. Benson bit off a mouthful of wheat bread in satisfaction and thought for more than 10 seconds. The work I'm at doesn't need any decent clothes. Well, to be precise, the clothes at home are sufficient. Without waiting for Klein to persuade him, he suggested, with this additional income, we would truly have savings. I plan on buying a few books on accountancy and studying. Klein, Militia, I do not wish that my weekly salary remain below £2 in 5 years. Hey, as you know, my boss and manager have shit for brains. Their mouths stink the moment they open them. Excellent idea, agreed Klein. He also took the opportunity to steer the conversation. Why don't you read some of the grammar books in my room? To be truly dignified and to earn a handsome pay, that's something rather critical. Perhaps, in the times to come, the civil servant examinations will appear in Loan Kingdom. Preparing ahead of time would give him the advantage. Benson's eyes lit up when he heard that. I've indeed forgotten about that. Here, let's toast to a beautiful future. He did not drink dry beer. Instead, he poured clear oyster soup into 3 cups and clinked his cup with his siblings. After drinking the clear soup, he looked at his sister who was wrestling with the pan-fried fish. He chuckled and said, aside from Benson's books, I think Melissa needs a new dress too. Melissa looked up and shook her head incessantly. No, I think it's best to save it up. Klein finished the sentence for her. Yeah, Melissa nodded in agreement. In fact, if you do not seek the best fabrics and the newest designs, it would not be too expensive. We can save up the remaining money, said Klein in a manner which did not allow for disagreement. Benson added, Militia, are you planning on wearing the old dress again to Selena's 16th birthday bash? Selena Wood was Melissa's classmate and good friend. She came from quite a good family background. Her elder brother was a practicing solicitor and her father was a senior employee of Backhand Bank's Tingen branch. However, the so-called bash was only a dinner invitation to friends where they chatted and played cards. All right, Melissa lowered her head and mumbled a response. Then, she ruthlessly forked a piece of stewed beef. After a short silence, she suddenly recalled something and looked up abruptly. Mrs. Short from next door got her maidservant to send the calling card over. She wishes to make a formal visit on Sunday, at 4 in the afternoon tomorrow. She wants to get to know her new neighbors. Mrs. Short. Klein looked at his siblings, confounded. Benson rapped the side of the table with his fingers and appeared to be thinking. Mrs. Short from 4 Daffodil Street? I met her husband before. He's a senior solicitor. Senior solicitor, perhaps he knows Selena's brother, said Melissa with some hints of delight. We are at 2 Daffodil Street. Klein nodded slightly. It's imperative we get to know our neighbors, but as you know, I still have to be at the company on Sunday. I only have time off on Monday. Please pass my apologies to Mrs. Short. With that said, he suddenly recalled the neighbors of his former life when he was young, as well as the neighbors in the apartment from Iron Cross Street. He was amused as he sighed lightly. To have formal visits, shouldn't neighbors get to know each other through natural interaction? Ha ha, Klein, that's because you aren't aware. You have read a lot of newspapers recently, but you have not broached the magazines catered towards families of middle-aged women. They placed families with an annual income of £100 to £1,000 as middle class. They promoted it as the framework of the entire kingdom and praised how the middle class doesn't have the arrogance of the aristocrats and the wealthy. Nor are they as crass as the low-income brackets. Benson lightly and happily explained, these magazines impart many simplified ceremonies which the aristocrats practice in their interactions. As such, it becomes a target of the middle class. Thus, this results in the differences between intimate calls, semi-formal calls, and formal calls. As he spoke, he shook his head and chuckled. Typically, gentlemen, madams, and ladies who view themselves in this class will be very particular about details. They will visit their neighbors and friends from 2 to 6 in the afternoon. It's known as a morning call 1. Morning call? Klein and Melissa asked in surprise. Why was a visit from 2 to 6 in the afternoon a morning call? Benson put down his fork and knife, threw his hands up, and smiled. I do not know why either. All I did was read the magazines my female colleague brought. Yeah, perhaps it's because they wear their morning gowns to make the call. Morning gowns were a form of formal attire worn during mass or gatherings. Later, it was considered as formal attire for the day, different from the formal attire for evening functions. All right, remember to buy some good coffee powder and tea leaves in the afternoon. Buy some muffins and lemonade tarts from Mrs. Smirrin. We must not ill-treat our neighbors. Klein chuckled as he dipped his remaining bread into the meat sauces, grabbed some potato and put it into his mouth. The next morning was a Sunday morning. Klein finished the last mouthful of inferior tea, put down the newspapers, and wore his halved-top hat. Picking up his silver-inlaid black cane, he sauntered out the door and took a public carriage to Jarland Street. He greeted Roseanne, who was planning to sleep in the break room after finishing her night duty. After which, he went all the way down to the basement. After turning a corner, he met Network member, Sleepless Royal Redine. She looked like a cold lady. Her brows were long and slender, sitting atop large eyes. Her hair was a silky smooth black. Good morning, Madame Redine, Klein greeted with a smile. Royal used her deep blue eyes to glance at him and nodded indiscernibly in return. The two quickly passed by each other when Royal stopped and said with her eyes trained forward, ritualistic magic is a very dangerous thing. Klein was taken aback. By the time he turned around, all he saw was her departing back. Thank you. He frowned and shouted that royal readings back. After taking a left band, he quickly met old Neil inside the armory, as well as Brett, who should not have been there. Let's go to my place. I've already received the corresponding materials. Brett has agreed to watch the armory for me, said old Neil with a chuckle. Clyne was immediately surprised. We aren't doing it here. Old Neil held a silver chest and tutted. There's no space here to practice ritualistic magic. Clyne did not ask further. He followed old Neil up to the streets and took a public carriage to the North Borough suburbs. Old Neil's place was a bungalow. The garden in front of it was filled with roses, golden mint, and other materials. The moment he entered, there was a carpeted foyer. There were 2 high-back chairs and an umbrella rack. Through the foyer was an expansive living room. The walls were plastered with light-colored wallpaper. The floors were a dark brown color. In the middle of the room was a tiny carpet with floral imprints, and placed above it was a heavy round table. Surrounding the table were comfortable long benches, single-seaters, and a piano. My deceased wife loved music. Old Neil pointed at the piano and mentioned in passing, the sofa and coffee table are in the bedrooms, let's do the ritualistic magic in the living room. All right, Clyne replied cautiously. After old Neil put down the silver chest, he laughed and said, let me demonstrate to you ritualistic magic. Make sure to observe and remember the ritual. As he spoke, he took out a fake goatskin parchment from the chest. It was specially made and it had strange pictures drawn on it with black ink that exuded a serene fragrance. Clyne kept watching and finally discovered that old Neil was seemingly, likely, possibly drawing an IOU. When old Neil filled in the corresponding field with the number 30 and the corresponding pound symbol, Clyne could not help but ask out of puzzlement and confusion, Mr. Neil, what kind of ritualistic magic are you doing? Old Neil coughed and answered very seriously, I'll be using magic to settle the debt of £30 today. You can do that. Clyne's eyes widened as his mouth gaped. The descriptions of calling cards and morning calls are facts regarding socializing in the Victorian era.